Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We're breaking into programming so that you can hear from Aurora police who are about to take questions publicly for the first time since an officer shot and killed a homeowner on Monday night. A man who had just defended his family from an intruder in his home. A lot of questions about whether that shooting was legally justified.
We've been hearing various details about this, some from the family and from the family's attorney in this case, and a little bit from Aurora police. But they also said they were asked as part of the investigation to keep the details tight and not release them early on because they were going to gather the information and share what body camera video also showed in this case. Of course, we put that request in right away. Again, we're talking about a homeowner who died in this case after he killed an intruder. The family attorney says that intruder was attacking his grandson. This is the man who was shot by Aurora police, Gary Black, and this happened early Monday morning in North Aurora on Montview Avenue inside the home.
Chief Metz, the Aurora Police Chief, whom we will hear from at this press briefing, posted a video on social media yesterday talking about misinformation in this case. He specifically said misinformation on social media. And one thing that we're going to be listening for is he saying this misinformation is just community speculation about what happened, or is he going to directly push back on the account of the family's attorney? The family has retained an attorney who, if you're familiar with the news, you may know, Qusair Mohamedbhai. He has taken on a number of police departments in our area following controversial shootings, trying to force them to reform. He says that Gary Black's wife, Jeannette, called in a very specific description of him, what he was wearing, and the fact that the intruder was naked, trying to save her husband from an accidental shooting like this. Mr. Mohamedbhai also suggested that the officer was outside the home and shot Mr. Black inside the home. And then there's the issue of what body camera footage shows. Hopefully we are about to get some answers.
I'm Officer Bill Hummel. I'm a spokesperson.
And we are about to have the introduction of Police Chief Nick Metz, and at his side is 18th Judicial District Attorney George Brockler.
You're going to be hearing from Chief Metz today, also accompanied by the Assistant District Attorney of the 17th Judicial District, Jess Redmond, the 18th Judicial District Attorney, George Brockler, and also present is Sergeant Matt Files with the Aurora Major Crimes Homicide Unit. I want to remind everybody that the information that you're going to hear today is preliminary in nature and is subject to change due to the ongoing investigation. Chief Metz.
Thank you. This morning I had the honor and privilege to meet with about 10 plus family members of Mr. Richard Gary Black. It was a meeting that I think was incredibly helpful and healing, not only for their family but also for the Aurora Police Department, who continues to remain heartbroken over this incident. During that meeting, I learned a lot about Mr. Black. I learned obviously that he was a family man. His wife talked about how she had first met him, how long they had been together, few funny stories along the way. And so there were actually some times during that meeting where there was a little bit of levity during a very serious discussion. Mr. Black, as most of you know, is a Vietnam veteran. He served this country honorably. He was a Purple Heart recipient, and he was awarded the Bronze Star after his service in Vietnam. Even after Vietnam, he continued to serve his country as a federal employee and retired from that position in 2015. He loved his family. He loved the time that he spent with his wife. His wife, in fact, was someone who actually assisted in a program that many of you know that we have called Cops Fighting Cancer, in which she actually had made quilts for children at Children's Hospital who were going through serious illnesses. There's no doubt in our mind, and there's certainly no dispute in any way, shape, or form, that Mr. Black saved his family's life that night, in particular his young grandson. There's no doubt that Mr. Black put himself before his family, that he did everything he could to protect what was most important to him, and that was his family. And so, as I said earlier, we remain heartbroken over this situation. We have assured the family that we are there for them in any way, shape, or form that we can be. And we've continued over these last few days to have regular communication with them and have provided different types of assistance over these last few difficult days. We know and we understand that, as we've said several times, that there's been a great deal of frustration in the community for the lack of information that has come out. This case, about 80 hours old at this time, has been painfully investigated, has lots of people, lots of folks who have been part of the investigation, part of making sure that the family is getting what they need. So I know that there's been a great deal of frustration in the community. And as I've stated several times already, there was a great deal of frustration on our part as a police department, because we do pride ourselves in getting out in front on as many things as we can. And part of that was due to the fact that because of the complexities of this investigation, in our partnership with the 17th Judicial District Attorney's Office, otherwise known as the Adams County District Attorney's Office, they asked that we not release information until certain aspects of the investigation were complete. And we felt, to maintain that integrity, that we would honor that request, as painful as it was for many, including ourselves. I know right from the beginning that there's going to be questions about, are we going to show the body-worn camera video? And I will read a letter to you that we received from the family just a few minutes ago. But at this time, and that will be explained a little bit further a little later, but at this time we will not be sharing that body-worn camera. Also, part of that is at the request of the Adams County DA, because of the fact that the investigation continues and so forth. We are supportive of releasing it. I want to make that very clear. But as I read the letter to you later, you'll see why, combined with the Adams County request, that we're not. We had planned to also play for you the 911 call from one of the residents from the home where Mr. Black lived. It has been decided that we will not share that right now. Again, I will share with you a letter about that. But part of the issue with both the 911 tape and the body-worn camera tape, just as with any type of technology, is that there are parts that aren't as clear as far as the clarity is concerned, that there are parts of the tapes that are inaudible because of a lot of background noise. So one of the things that I am going to do is order that we conduct an independent forensic review of both the 911 tape and the body-worn camera, so that we can make sure that we have all the accurate information that is presented in both those mediums. And again, I will read you a statement from the family in just a few minutes. It's no surprise that the family is incredibly traumatized. They are grieving. As you know, there was a young child in the home that was violently and seriously assaulted, and there is a great deal of concern on their part for the health and well-being of that child. And as you'll hear in the letter, some of the decisions that we are making today about some of the release of material greatly has to do with that child's ability to heal, and that is incredibly important. Obviously, when we are talking about different types of incidents within a police department, an officer-involved shooting ranks right up there about as far as being one of the most serious situations that can occur. That we take these very serious. That there's obviously a great deal of community interest, a great deal of obviously interest from the family in wanting to know the facts. So we are here today, obviously, to now be able to share with you some of those things. Because we are at the disadvantage of not being able to show the body-worn camera and play that 911 tape for you right now, I'm going to relay to you what I have personally heard. I have probably listened to the 911 tape, I've forgotten how many times, many, many times. And I've watched the body-worn camera footage along with numerous folks in my agency, as well as members from the Adams County District Attorney's Office. I should mention that when we did meet with the family this morning, and I apologize I didn't mention this, when we did meet with the family this morning, we did allow them to listen to the 911 tape, and we did allow them to view the body-worn camera footage, as disturbing as both were. So I'm going to start at the beginning here as to what happened. As we are able to piece together right now, across the street from the Black family's home, there is a house there where they were having some kind of a party or gathering. One of the individuals there, named Deshaun Harper, for whatever reason, was out of control. He began damaging cars right near that house, was acting irrationally, and at one point, while damaging a car, he injured himself. We started to receive a number of 911 calls from that location, and we are actually going to play for you those calls as well as the dispatch call from dispatch to our patrol units. We will play those for you here a little later. He injured himself, and then again we began getting calls from 911 from the home on Iola Street. Those 911 calls, as you will see, were very difficult to get information. A number of calls, people hung up on the dispatcher before providing necessary information, and in fact in one, I think you'll hear one caller says, the dispatch actually calls that person back, and the person says, "I don't know where I am, just get here." Not a lot of information to go on at that point, and we still really don't know what's going on, and there's still no description provided to our dispatch as to what this person looked like who was out of control. At one point, this individual decided to run to the house across the street, that being the house of the Black family, and began pounding on the door, and at one point knocked the door completely off its hinges. I don't know, I know some of you have been up to that location or have seen pictures. It is a very big door, a very solid door, and somehow was able to knock that door right off the hinges. And he went inside, and when he went inside, at one point he grabbed the 11-year-old child and dragged the child into the bathroom. I'm not going to go into the graphic details of what happened in the bathroom, other than to say that that child was violently assaulted. He locked the door, and at one point during these 911 calls, someone made a comment that the man who had entered was trying to drown him. We did receive the call from one of the residents. In this case, this was Mr. Black's wife, about what was going on. It was an incredibly difficult tape to listen to emotionally, but also a very difficult tape to listen to because of all the screaming that was going on. A lot of screaming going on, a very, very chaotic situation. The dispatcher had a very difficult time hearing what was being said, had to repeat questions several times. At one point, the dispatcher did ask the caller, "Are there weapons?" The caller asked somebody else, "Are there weapons?" And their answer came back as no. There was no physical description given, even during that phone call, as to what that suspect looked like. What was told to us during that phone call that she was able to get out was that the person was in the bathroom, was hurting the child, that there was lots of blood everywhere, and that, rescue was needing to be called. When the suspect got into the residence, a number of folks from across the street where he started departing ran in after him. So imagine yourself in your own home. It's 1:30 in the morning, and not only do you have one person breaking your door down, now you have multiple people coming in after him, and you don't know what's going on. These folks ran in for the purpose of trying to get the suspect out of the house. Unfortunately, it sounds like he may have locked the door, but for whatever reason, they were not able to get to him. At one point, and I apologize, I'm rambling a little bit here. When we were on the phone with one of the other callers from a residence across the street, they had mentioned on the call, as I'm sure you'll hear here, that family member was on drugs. And what kind of drugs, I don't know. So I initially just wanted to kind of paint that picture for you of what was going on at the house. Again, an incredibly chaotic situation, a very violent situation, lots and lots of folks involved, probably upwards of 10 people in that house at one time before police got there. And I think this may be a good time for us to key up the dispatch tape and the other 911 tapes that came in. So I'm going to turn that over.
Yeah, I'll have services here for my tech.
Which one are we showing?
301. 301 on the unknown problem. It's going to be at 10609 East Montview Boulevard, 10609 East Montview Boulevard. It's RP who's stating that there was somebody trying to break into their house. Lots of people crying. There's somebody that's bleeding there. It is going to be across the street from the 1995 Iola Street call with a party that's saying that there was something going, an altercation there. 301 South Florida. In a car at 301. Cruiser 13 on me. Cruiser 13, thank you. 301, Cruiser 13, we're starting rescue since they're saying there's a known male bleeding in the house. Cruiser 13, sir. 301, Cruiser 13, I know you're on scene. They're saying a male was possibly trying to drown a 11-year-old. Cruiser 13, we got shots fired. You didn't say by for tons.
That's Charlotte. 317.
Cruiser 13 calling shots fired at 10609 East Montview Boulevard. You guys start that way.
Cover arrow.
Cruiser 7, we here. Shots fired, officer. Copy, rescue's already en route. Channel. So what happened? Channels are patched at this time.
Where are you guys at?
It should be at 10609 East Montview Boulevard, unless they switch somewhere. Cruiser 32, I need a district 1.
1824 as well.
Hello. 301. 301 going.
If you could start the next unit in just to secure the people out in the front yard.
I got units walking outside of the center. 301 building with your traffic.
As the next units come in, secure the people in the front yard. There's like 4 or 5 witnesses in the front yard.
Alright, copy. 318, what's your traffic?
I'll actually be added to the D1 call. We'll just add it, thanks.
Cruiser 13, do you have medical coming? Cruiser 13, that's a firm. Rescue's in route.
Okay, just out of the stage and we'll clear in just a second. We'll clear in the house. We got 2 male parties.
Copy, stage and rescue, 2 male parties, and we're clearing the house.
Hey, boy, could you come up here and get the child? Male child. Okay.
321, Monty, call please.
Come on, Cruiser 13, we're clear back here. Cruiser 13, we're code 4 here. Say rescue hot, please.
Cruiser 13, copy, rescue coming in hot.
Hey, Regina, when you get there, work on shutting down the roads for everybody. Hey, bro. 13, I'm out.
309, do we have any parties outstanding? Cruiser 13, we can out.
Okay, Cruiser 13, we still have the channels patched. Can we send everybody over to channel 1? Yeah, I'll have services there. Air 4 month tech. 301. Go away. 301 on the unknown problem. It's going to be at 10609 East Montview Blvd.
Okay. All right. My apologies. I was just told that we don't have those other 911 tapes. We are going to make sure we get those to you as quickly as possible, so I apologize for that. But in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and move forward on this. As I stated before, because we can't show the body-worn camera at this time, I'm going to describe for you what I've personally viewed, and then just kind of go from there. So on the 911 tape, or excuse me, on the body-worn camera, the first 30 seconds of that body-worn camera are the officers inside the patrol car responding to the incident. You don't hear audio during that first 30 seconds because there is a buffer that is in place that the audio doesn't start until they actually turn on the cameras. But it will always record the last, or maintain the last 30 seconds, but prior to turning on the camera. So you see them responding. When they arrive at the scene, they get out of their car, they begin walking towards the car. There are numerous people out front of the house. They are very agitated, they're very emotional, there's a lot of yelling. You hear people saying something to the comment of, you know, we try to get in there, he's hurting the child. Keeping in mind, at one point you hear, as I think you heard here, there was a dispatch to officers that says that the child was being drowned. They're walking up to the home. As they walk up to the home, you can see on the camera that the officer passes the wife of Mr. Black, and as she passes, she says, and I quote, "He has a gun," unquote. Again, that quote was, "He has a gun." Again, the officers, not knowing what's going on inside, continue to move forward. As they're moving forward, they hear shots fired. So within 33 seconds of their arrival on scene, 33 seconds within their arrival on scene, they hear shots fired from inside the home. Again, the officers could hear a lot of screaming inside the home. And again, they're advancing towards the house when the shots are fired. When the shots are fired, the officers step back a bit from the front door, and a little bit, just a few seconds later, they see Mr. Black emerge into the officer's view. So the officer is just outside the front door. He is looking inside, and he about what we're estimating 15 to 20 feet from where they were. They see this man emerge from behind a wall. He walks out of what appears to be a room. He walks back to the room, and they can see when he comes in and out, they see that he is holding a gun. They also see that in one hand, and he's holding a flashlight in the other hand. He's walking back and forth. At about 1 second later, the officer yet one of the officers yells, "Gun, gun." For the next 13 seconds, officers continue to give at least 5 commands to Mr. Black to drop the gun and to show his hands. We don't know why, but for whatever reason, Mr. Black did not drop the gun. About 10 seconds later, during all these commands, Mr. Black walks around into the main room, walking towards the officers, again with the gun in one hand and the flashlight in the other. He begins to raise the flashlight towards the officer. He still has the gun in the other hand, and it was at that time that my officer fired 4 rounds, causing Mr. Black to fall to the ground. They continue to give Mr. Black orders to show his hands. They asked for rescue. They put out over the air that shots had been fired inside. For the next 42 seconds, as the officers were trying to establish, you know, the safety of themselves and others, they had a conversation that, look, we still have a baby inside or a child inside that is potentially being drowned. Officers were able to hear the screams coming from inside. That officer who actually fired the first or fired those rounds directed the officers behind him to glove up and to begin to provide aid to Mr. Black. That officer and probably one or two other officers immediately then converged forward and went towards where the screaming was coming from. When they went in, they found the bedroom or the bathroom where the screaming was coming from, and it was there that the officers found a deceased nude man on the floor of the bathroom, which turns out to be Mr. Harper. Inside the bathtub was the juvenile, the young man, and his father. His father was in there, and again, they were in the bathroom communicating with the officers. The child was screaming that the suspect, Mr. Harper, was the one that assaulted him, and gave pretty graphic details at that immediate time of what had just happened to him. That same officer then pied away, went to another room to check because they don't know how many suspects are in the room. They don't know, we knew there were multiple people in there. They need to establish that scene safe. Other officers behind him actually went to the bathroom to care for the child and the dad. That officer and another officer continued to search the house for additional injured and or additional suspects. So from that time until they found the young child in the bathroom, it was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. From the time they arrived to the time they went into that bathroom, it was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. So this was a very fast-paced response. Once the scene had been secured, Mr. Black was immediately transported to the hospital, where he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries. I personally was notified not long after the shooting, and myself, along with other members of our command staff, members of our Aurora Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, the Denver Police Department, and the 17th Judicial District Attorney's Office responded. And I actually personally responded to the scene and was briefed a little bit of what happened there. I've mentioned the suspect's name a couple times already, but just for the record, his name is Dejan Qusair Harper, date of birth April 17th, 1992. He has an extensive and violent background. It is obvious to us that Mr. Harper was killed by Mr. Black. Was killed by Mr. Black as Mr. Black was attempting to save the lives of his family. So we have provided you in your media packet some information about Mr. Harper, courtesy of the Denver Police Department. Let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the officer. As I said before, this officer ran into an incredibly dangerous situation. He put himself in harm's way. He ran in as others were running out, even after shots were fired, knowing that he could potentially be shot himself. Even after the shooting, as I said before, he directed officers to not only give aid to Mr. Black, but also to provide aid to the child and the father that were in the bathroom. This officer has been with the APD for 3 years. He works in District 1, which is Northeast Aurora, works the graveyard shift. He's been involved in a number of community events, and in fact, that Saturday morning prior to the shooting was at our Shop with a Cop event at Walmart. He has no prior internal affairs complaints. This officer is a military veteran who served his country on one or two deployments. What I can tell you about this officer is that in conversations that our folks have had with him, is that he is incredibly heartbroken over this situation. He, being a veteran himself, and then finding out as well that not only Mr. Black had what Mr. Black had done to save his family, but also being a veteran, has been devastating to him. And he and his family wanted me to make sure that I relayed to the community and to Mr. Black's family that they are praying for them, excuse me. I know that many of you are aware, since it's been in the media, that this same officer was involved in an officer-involved shooting about 30 days before this one. And I want to talk just real briefly about that. That shooting occurred on June 27th, 2018 in the 8900 block of East Colfax. That was on the Arapahoe County side. That explains a little bit by why Mr. Brockler is here. In that situation, as much like this one, we responded. We investigated that situation in partnership with Denver PD, and in this case, 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office. He returned to duty 18 days, or basically 2.5 weeks after his shooting. Prior to him coming back, number one, he went through all the requirements that are part of our policy for officers to adhere to prior to coming back after an officer-involved shooting. He received peer support through our Employee Support and Wellness Unit by experienced officers who have been involved in officer-involved shootings. He actually had spent time with our department's psych services. He also spent time down at the police range with our trainers to make sure that they could tell that he was ready to come back to work. And then in consultation with the Arapahoe County DA, we believed that, and in consultation with our psych services, we believed that this officer was ready to come back to work. I know that sometimes questions come up, well, was that too soon? I can tell you that when you look at, and I know many of you have been provided this packet, but when you look at the International Association Chiefs of Police standards when it comes to officers returning to work after an officer-involved shooting, that the typical range is 3 days. And in this case, we far extended that, and that's common. We review each of these situations on how officers are involved in a shooting and when they come back on a case-by-case basis. The reality is our officers, we can't control what our officers are going to run into, whether it's 10 days after a shooting or 2 years after a shooting. The situation dictates their response, and I believe this officer was ready to go back. One of the things I have asked, because of the uniqueness of this case, I've asked both the 18th District and the 17th District Attorney's offices to conduct a expedited investigation and review once we turn it over to them. They have both asked, at least at this time, that the body-worn camera footage not be released until those are adjudicated. We are committed to releasing those, but again, as I'll read in a letter here from the family of Mr. Black, part of why we won't be releasing it at this time. And so at this time, I will read the statement from the Gary Black family. And it says, this morning, many members of the family of Richard Gary Black met with Chief Nicholas Metz and other officials of the Aurora Police Department. The family reviewed a body-worn camera video recording and Mrs. Black's 911 audio recording. The family sincerely appreciated the opportunity to review these materials and recognized that there was no obligation for APD to share these materials at this time. At this time, the family has requested that the APD not release these materials to the public. The family desires space to grieve and does not wish to have the family and violent moments of Gary's distinguished life be his public legacy. The early morning of July 30th, 2018 was emotionally traumatic for all officers involved. The 911 telephone call by Mrs. Black was difficult to understand as large portions were unintelligible. The family acknowledges that APD's position that the responding officers did not receive a description of intruders. The family has learned that members of the APD have been receiving threats and subjected to other forms of harassment. This must stop. Mr. Black was a disabled U.S. Army veteran who deeply appreciated law enforcement. Mrs. Black has personally quilted dozens of blankets for the Aurora Police Department. Any disrespect to law enforcement carried out in Mr. Black's name would be contrary to his wishes. The investigation is in its early stages, and until it is complete, there will remain many more questions than answers. Any inquiries for the Black family should be directed to their attorneys, Qusair Mohamedbhai or Siddhartha Rathod at 303-578-4000. As we said before, we continue to provide any kind of family assistance we can to the Gary Black family. Our hearts go out to them, and we want to make sure that they're getting what they need. And then just to end on, and then we'll certainly open it up to any questions that you may have, and then certainly Mr. Brockler or Mr. Redmond can address some of those concerns that you may have. Our officers responded to an emergency call. They did what I expected them to do. They were confronted by a very, very violent and complex situation, and within 2 minutes, if that, had to make some very, very critical decisions that for the last 4 days we've been able to analyze and dissect over and over and over again. There was a reference that our officers acted recklessly. I dispute that strongly. They were not reckless. These officers responded, again, how I would expect them to respond in that kind of situation, given the limited amount of information that they were acting on, and the fact that they were responding to shots fired inside and immediately put themselves in harm's way to help save lives. With that, I will open it up to questions. I'm going to ask that, since there are quite a few of you in here, that if you wouldn't mind raising your hands so we can kind of keep a little bit of order to this, I would really appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Did officers announce police? I don't know, I didn't hear you say that. Did they announce police as they were arriving?
We don't believe the word police was used, but they did announce several times, drop the gun, show us your hands. And again, this was within seconds of seeing the gun.
But he wasn't able to see the officers or hear police?
I don't know what he was able to hear. Unfortunately, one of the things that the family shared with us today was that Mr. Black had a significant hearing impairment that he received from his service in the military. So I don't know what he was able to hear or not hear. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any chance that there was any ringing in Mr. Black's ear after firing himself that he may not have heard what the police officers were asking? And did he in return give any kind of indication that he had heard or understood what was happening?
What I can tell you, and that would really be speculation on my part to say whether he had it ringing in his ears or not. I believe it would certainly be possible, but unfortunately the only person who could really answer that question would be Mr. Black. He was able to respond to officers as they got closer when they were asking questions about who else is in the house, and he was able to tell them that his grandson and son were in the bathroom, but that was as they were closer to him.
This was
After the shots were fired, when he was down.
So he was down, he was still able to talk.
Yes, ma'am.
The lawyer for the family said the wife gave a very detailed description of what he looked like and that there shouldn't have been a confusion of who was who in that house. Can you respond to that?
Yes, and I want to be incredibly respectful to my response because obviously the wife was going through an incredibly traumatic situation. In all of our reviews of the 911 tape, there was no description given. As I said before, when asked on the phone whether there were weapons, and she asked somebody else if there were weapons, and then she came back and said no. And then, as I explained earlier, as our officer was going to the house and she was coming from the house, you can see her on the phone. So I don't know if she was talking to him or talking to whoever it was on the phone, because dispatch was still on the phone with her as officers arrived. But you could hear her say, and I'll say it again, quote, "He's got a gun," unquote. That was the extent of the information. I can't tell you right now if that officer heard that statement.
Can you
Yes.
elaborate as to why Mr. Harper picked that house? And the second part of that question is, did you perform any toxicology on him to figure out what, if anything, he may have been on?
You know, I'm actually going to ask Sergeant Files just to address that part of it, and then maybe kind of talk real quick about the toxicology process and so forth for the coroners.
Sure. So, reference your question about the relationship between the two homes. All indications are that these people are unknown to one another, regardless of the fact that they lived across the street. Related to the question about toxicology, I can tell you that the process is time-consuming. Those lab results are sent to a lab to be analyzed. Those results come back. It's typically a 6 to 10 week turnaround, and that's dependent upon the load of work at the respective labs. And so oftentimes that's the last bit of information that we're waiting on before we can complete our summary for the district attorneys.
Thanks, sir. But did the people on the scene express to you why the intruder went across to that specific house? There's a number of homes in the area. He could have picked any which one.
Correct. And what we can tell you is there's no evidence that we've come across that explains that. Not from them. It appears to be completely random.
And just to piggyback on that, when you're asked about the toxicology, just to remind you earlier, I mentioned that one of the callers from the house across the street mentioned that he was on drugs. Didn't elaborate what kind. Tony.
Was there any initial pushback against the police there? Some witnesses told us that people that were connected with the intruder thought at first that the police had shot Mr. Harper.
Well, we heard those same rumors. Again, keep in mind that as our officers are approaching the scene, they hear shots fired from inside. And then after they get back into the bathroom, the very first officer, the same officer who did fire his weapon at Mr. Black, finds Mr. Harper on the floor dead. At this point, according to our witness statements and so forth, Mr. Black is the one who shot and killed Mr. Harper in an attempt to save his family. Tony.
Chief, understandable accepting the family's request.
What an astonishingly sad situation. There is no sign whatsoever that the decorated Vietnam vet and grandfather who was killed in his home by Aurora police mistakenly earlier this week ever heard officers' commands to drop the gun. You heard just a minute ago in the end of a long recitation of events from Aurora Police Chief Nick Metz that not only did Gary Black have an existing hearing impairment, but it was also reasonable to assume that he might have had temporary hearing loss after firing his own weapon to defend his family against an intruder. The police chief saying that Mr. Black never showed any signal that he saw or heard officers' commands prior to being shot and killed. Shot, rather.
And he described in great detail what they saw in that body camera video that the family has asked not be released, as well as those 911 calls and the chaotic situation that unfolded there and the screams of a child in a bathroom and the darkness and everything they dealt with, and the fact that they heard his wife say he has a gun. But now we don't know if she was talking to dispatch describing the intruder or what the description was at that point.
And some very respectful pushback from the chief against the family's account as provided by their attorney that suggested that the homeowner's wife had provided a description of the naked intruder, had provided a description of her husband, and police saying, no, she never said that her husband had a gun. She never said what he was wearing. She never described the intruder. So you've got officers going in blind to this chaotic situation, which developed very, very quickly, and then it comes down to those 13 seconds where they see Mr. Black armed in the home, not sure if he's the intruder or if he's the homeowner, and the 5 commands in 13 seconds that he shows no sign of responding to.
And they know that a child is being violently assaulted.
Just down the hall.
And then to hear also, as you can tell, Chief Metz is trying to be as forthcoming as possible, but he talked about the officer that fired the fatal shot here, also said he too is a military vet, and said that he is heartbroken over this circumstance.
A lot of back and forth over the last week about Aurora Police and their standards on body camera footage. They tended not to release it. They actually got sued over that earlier this year by the Denver Police Union that wanted a piece of video. So that's the latest from Aurora Police. We're continuing to gather information in the question and answer session. 9 News at 4 is right around.